It was just another ordinary day in the small town where Ethan Carter had built his empire from the ground up. The sun shone brightly through the tall windows of his office building, casting long shadows across the polished floors. In the early hours of the morning, the city was still waking up, but inside the sleek high-rise, things were already in full swing. Ethan was hard at work, reviewing his calendar and preparing for the big gala that evening. This gala, a gathering of the town's most influential people, was known for its opulence and exclusivity. It was the event of the year, where connections were made, deals were sealed, and reputations were both built and shattered. But for Ethan, it wasn't just another night of socializing with the elite. This year, things would be different, and he wasn't prepared for how much his life, and someone else's, would change. Sitting at his desk, his fingers hovered over his laptop. He wasn't used to feeling anything but in control, but the quiet thought kept swirling in his mind: what will people think when they see her with me tonight? The her he was thinking about wasn't a glamorous socialite or a high-profile business associate. No, Ethan's mind was on his receptionist, Emma. She had worked for him for the past 3 years, a young woman who had always been kind, diligent, and quietly competent in her role. She had no desire for the spotlight, no aspirations to climb the corporate ladder. Emma was just, well, Emma. An ordinary person in Ethan's extraordinary world. Ethan had built his empire from the ground up, starting as a young man with nothing but a good idea, some ambition, and the kind of drive that would leave most people exhausted. He had worked late nights and lived with a single-minded purpose. Now, he was a self-made millionaire, his name recognized across the business world. His company was thriving, with more investments and acquisitions than he could keep track of. But despite all the success, something was missing. He had friends, yes, but they were more acquaintances than true companions. He had colleagues, but they were either constantly trying to one-up each other or, worse, constantly trying to extract something from him. No one seemed to see him for who he was, a man who still remembered his humble beginnings. Emma, however, had always been different. She never fawned over him, never asked for favors, and never tried to impress anyone. She was content in her quiet position, offering him coffee in the mornings, keeping the office running smoothly, and rarely making waves. But she was also brilliant, something he had come to realize over time, though he hadn't paid much attention to it at first. Emma had an uncanny knack for reading people and situations. She'd often offer him advice, simple, yet profound insights into his business decisions. And though she had never once seemed interested in climbing the corporate ladder, she had a mind as sharp as any top executive he knew. That's what led Ethan to invite her to the gala that night. It wasn't some grand gesture of friendship. In fact, he wasn't sure why he'd thought of it at all. He had grown accustomed to attending these events alone, surrounded by colleagues and other high-profile business owners. But this year, something about it felt different. He wanted to bring someone with him who wasn't caught up in the world of power and money. Emma had always been there, quietly present, and perhaps, he reasoned, it would be nice to have someone who wouldn't expect anything from him other than to enjoy the evening. Maybe it would even be refreshing, he thought. But as he sent the invitation to Emma, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her presence would change everything. Emma had looked at the invitation in disbelief. She had worked with Ethan for years, but this was the first time he'd asked her to join him at such a prestigious event. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Surely, he meant to invite someone else, a colleague, perhaps. She was just the receptionist, after all. No one had ever asked her to attend such a high-profile affair. But when Ethan confirmed it, she was taken aback. "I don't know, Ethan," she had said cautiously when he mentioned it to her in passing. "I'm not really the type for these things. I wouldn't know what to say to half the people there." Ethan chuckled, but there was no mockery in his tone. "You'll be fine. Just be yourself. Besides, it's not like you're there to impress anyone. I just thought it might be fun." She hesitated, unsure of what to do. Emma had always preferred to stay in the background, content in her comfortable, predictable routine. A gala was far from the world she was used to. It was full of people who lived by a different set of rules, people who traded in power, fame, and influence. People who had no room for someone like her. But something in Ethan's voice had made her change her mind. It wasn't just the invitation, it was the way he made her feel as if she belonged, even if she didn't fully understand why. She agreed, albeit reluctantly, to accompany him, telling herself that at least it would be an interesting experience. The night of the gala arrived faster than either of them had expected. The city streets glistened under the lights as Ethan drove up to Emma's apartment building, pulling up in his sleek black car. He had dressed in a tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the millionaire business mogul he was. But when Emma stepped outside, dressed in a modest but elegant black dress, she was immediately aware of how much the evening would contrast with her usual life. Ethan offered her a reassuring smile, as if to say that everything would be fine. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of her depth. Her nerves grew stronger the closer they got to the event. She had no idea what to expect. As they approached the venue, she took in the massive building before her, the grandiose steps leading up to a pair of enormous glass doors, through which she could already see people milling about in their finest attire. Inside, the gala was everything she had imagined and more. The ballroom was filled with chandeliers that cast a soft, warm glow over the elegant crowd. Everywhere she looked, there were familiar faces from the business world, dressed in the latest couture, with conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine. People laughed, smiled, exchanged business cards, and made deals all under the watchful eye of the glittering lights above. Ethan walked ahead, confident and composed, introducing Emma to a few of his colleagues, but Emma felt herself shrinking under the weight of it all. She didn't belong here. But as she stood there, trying to navigate her discomfort, something strange happened. Emma found herself standing in front of a small group of business owners, one of whom was speaking passionately about a new venture. Something about his words struck her. The way he spoke about innovation and opportunity, it resonated with her in a way that she hadn't expected. Without thinking, she piped up, offering a simple suggestion, a thought about how the business could pivot to take advantage of an emerging trend. Her voice was steady, and as soon as the words left her mouth, the room seemed to hush. Everyone turned to look at her. She had no idea why she had said it, but there was no turning back now. The conversation stopped, and the group began to discuss her idea. They were impressed. One by one, they asked her questions, drawing out more of her insight, something she hadn't known she even had. Ethan stood off to the side, watching her with a growing sense of admiration. This wasn't the shy receptionist he had known. This was someone with potential, someone who could hold her own in any conversation. But as the night wore on, and as more people started to approach Emma, Ethan began to feel a mix of pride and unease. Something had shifted. Emma had captured the attention of the room, and though he was proud of her, he couldn't shake the feeling that the balance of power between them was about to change forever. It was in that moment that Ethan realized, the woman standing beside him had something more to offer than he had ever imagined. And in that instant, both their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet understand. The evening wore on, and as the night deepened, the atmosphere inside the ballroom grew even more intense. The clinking of champagne glasses, the hum of conversations, and the flickering of the grand chandeliers overhead all seemed to swirl around Emma, who was still processing the unexpected turn of events. The woman who had walked in as a nervous, reserved receptionist was now at the center of attention, surrounded by people who were eager to hear her ideas. It was all too much, yet she found herself enjoying it. Something within her had unlocked, something she hadn't known existed. Ethan stood back, watching as the attention shifted from him to her. He had been the one everyone came to for advice, the one people respected and admired. But tonight, the spotlight was on Emma. Her insights into the conversation about business opportunities had created a stir, and suddenly, the power players in the room were eager to hear more. They began to crowd around her, leaning in to ask questions, exchanging business cards, and offering congratulations. Emma, unsure at first, began to feel more confident. She answered their questions with a calmness she didn't know she had, feeling a spark of excitement with every passing moment. Ethan felt a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He had always known Emma was smart, but seeing her hold her own in a room full of titans of industry was something he hadn't anticipated. Her sharp observations and no-nonsense attitude were refreshing, especially among a crowd that often valued image over substance. He couldn't help but smile as she spoke, marveling at how effortlessly she navigated these high-stakes conversations. But with every compliment and every new contact she made, a small knot of unease began to form in his stomach. He'd brought her to this event as a casual companion, but he hadn't expected her to steal the show. The evening progressed, and the tension in Ethan's chest grew. He had invited Emma out of simple kindness, because he thought it might be fun to have someone at the gala who didn't have an agenda, someone who wasn't playing the game for status or money. But now, as Emma moved from conversation to conversation, exchanging ideas with investors, and impressing industry leaders, Ethan realized just how little he had considered what bringing her here might mean. Emma was no longer just his receptionist. She was becoming something far more significant, something that even he couldn't control. Throughout the night, Emma's confidence continued to grow. She moved through the crowd with an ease that surprised even her. At first, she had been awkward, unsure of where to stand or how to interact, but now, she was speaking with people who had the power to change the trajectory of their careers with a single word. And they were listening to her. They were asking for her opinion on everything from market trends to emerging technologies. Each time someone asked her a question or praised her insights, Emma could feel the rush of validation that she had been missing for so long. She hadn't realized it until now, but she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. But despite her growing excitement, a small voice in the back of her mind kept reminding her of who she was. She was still the same person who had sat behind a desk for years, answering phones and filing papers. She had never dreamed of being part of this world. All of this, the attention, the compliments, the conversations with powerful people, felt like a dream she could hardly grasp. She had no formal education in business or finance, she had only her instincts and years of quietly observing the people around her. But tonight, those instincts had led her to something much bigger than herself. As she stepped away from one conversation and glanced over at Ethan, she caught his eye. For a moment, the two of them locked gazes, and Emma could see a flicker of something in his expression, a mixture of pride, concern, and perhaps even jealousy. Ethan had always been the center of attention, and now, for the first time, someone else was in the spotlight. Emma knew he was proud of her, but she couldn't help but wonder what this shift meant for their relationship. Had she crossed some invisible line? Was this success going to change how he saw her? Just as she was contemplating this, a well-dressed man approached her, extending his hand with a grin. "Emma, right?" he asked, his voice smooth and welcoming. "I heard your thoughts on the new market trends earlier. That was brilliant. I'm Richard Gaines, and I'd love to talk more about your ideas." Emma shook his hand, smiling politely. Richard was a well-known investor, one of the most respected figures in the city. His reputation for making lucrative deals was legendary. To say that Emma felt intimidated would be an understatement, but she stood tall, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I'm happy to chat." Richard grinned. "I think you've got something special, Emma. We should discuss some opportunities I'm working on. You're the kind of person who can spot trends others miss. There's a place for you in this world if you want it." Emma grew more confident. She was no longer the shy receptionist who avoided the spotlight, she was someone people wanted to be around, someone whose opinion mattered. And Ethan couldn't help but wonder, Was this the beginning of something new for her? Or was it the start of her outgrowing him entirely? As the night drew to a close, Ethan found himself deep in thought. He had invited Emma here to show her a different side of life, but he hadn't expected her to leave such an indelible mark on the people around her, or on him. The shift had happened so quickly, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. One thing was certain, the gala came to an end, the last few guests trickled out, their laughter and chatter gradually fading into the night air. Ethan and Emma stood in the grand lobby, the echoes of the evening still resonating around them. The lavish ballroom had already begun to empty, the glimmering chandeliers now casting long, softened shadows on the floor. Ethan looked at Emma, who was still processing the whirlwind of the night. Her eyes, usually so calm, were now alive with a new energy, something he hadn't seen before. She had walked into the gala unsure of what to expect, but now, she stood there transformed, no longer just the quiet receptionist he had known for years, but someone with a presence that commanded attention. He watched her as she fiddled with the edge of her dress, clearly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She wasn't used to this world, but tonight, she had proven herself more capable than anyone could have imagined. Ethan had invited her to the gala out of curiosity, wanting to give her a glimpse of a life far removed from the mundane routine of her office job. What he hadn't expected was for Emma to steal the spotlight, capturing the attention of the most influential people in the room with her sharp, unassuming brilliance. It had been a revelation for him as well, a reminder that not everyone operated in the same circles, not everyone was interested in the same kind of power or wealth. Some people, like Emma, were just naturally gifted with insight, with a kind of quiet intelligence that could change the course of a conversation, or even an entire industry. As they made their way to the car, the cold night air hit them, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty street. Ethan's mind was still racing. He had invited her to the event, sure, but what came next? How had everything escalated so quickly? He had brought Emma here, thinking it might be a fun experience, but he hadn't expected the impact it would have on both of their lives. And as he glanced at her, he felt a growing sense of unease. It wasn't jealousy, he wasn't envious of Emma's newfound success or the admiration she had earned tonight. It was something else. A feeling he couldn't quite name. They reached the car, and Ethan held the door open for Emma. She climbed in, still processing the night. I can't bait had changed everything. She climbed in, still processing the night. I can't believe all that happened, she said, her voice soft but filled with a mixture of wonder and confusion. 1 minute, I was standing in the corner, unsure of what to do, and the next, people are asking for my opinion like I'm one of them. Ethan closed the door behind her and slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual. You were amazing tonight, he said, his tone genuine but layered with something he couldn't quite place. I knew you had potential, but I didn't expect to see you take over the room like that. Emma shook her head, clearly still in disbelief. I didn't take over anything. She paused, trying to find the right words, I just said what I thought. But I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I didn't know they'd respond like that. I think they saw something in you, Ethan replied, his voice tinged with admiration. But as he spoke, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, what did this mean for her? What did it mean for them? The drive back to the city was quiet, the only sound in the car being the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights as they passed by. Ethan's thoughts continued to churn, and as much as he tried to focus on the road ahead, his mind kept circling back to Emma. She was no longer the woman he had invited to the gala out of curiosity. She was someone entirely new, someone who had a future in front of her that didn't involve answering phones or scheduling appointments. She had a presence now, something he hadn't realized she was capable of until that night. She had confidence, intelligence, and a subtle but undeniable charisma. And if he were being honest with himself, a part of him felt that this transformation wasn't entirely something he could control anymore. Ethan, Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts, soft but carrying a weight he wasn't prepared for. What happens now? I mean, tonight was, well, amazing, but I'm not sure I even know how to process it. I wasn't expecting any of this. Ethan glanced over at her, his eyes flicking briefly to her face before returning to the road. He didn't know how to answer her. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen next. There had always been a clear line between them. He was the successful businessman, and she was his receptionist. It was a relationship built on respect, yes, but one that was clearly defined. But tonight, that line had blurred. Emma had taken a step into a world he had never expected her to enter, and now he was left trying to figure out how to handle it. I think tonight showed you something, Ethan said slowly, choosing his words carefully. You have a lot more to offer than you give yourself credit for. You're not just a receptionist, Emma. You have ideas, potential, and people are starting to notice. Emma didn't respond immediately, and Ethan could sense her grappling with the weight of his words. She had always kept her head down, done her job with quiet efficiency, and avoided the limelight. She had never dreamed of stepping into the world of high-powered business, and yet here she was, standing on the precipice of a completely new future. Ethan could see it in her eyes now. She was conflicted. She didn't know what to make of it either. When they reached her apartment building, Ethan parked the car and turned off the engine. I'll walk you inside, he said, though they both knew it wasn't just about walking her to the door. It was about what had happened tonight. It was about what it meant for them. They walked up the steps together in silence. The cold air outside had left a chill in the air, and Emma pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but for Emma, the world suddenly felt smaller. Everything she had known, everything that had defined her life so far, seemed distant now. She had tasted a different kind of life tonight, a life filled with power, opportunity, and the kind of people who could change the course of her future with a single conversation. As they reached her door, Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to say. I'm proud of you, Emma, he said, his voice more vulnerable than usual. I don't think you realize just how much you could do if you really put your mind to it. Emma smiled softly, but there was a certain sadness in her eyes. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this, she confessed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I never asked for any of this. I just didn't know that something like this could happen. I didn't even know I had it in me. Ethan gave a small chuckle. Sometimes, the world just hands you opportunities when you least expect them. Emma looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. And what about you, Ethan? What does this mean for you? I mean, I didn't think anything would change, but now it feels like everything has. He exhaled slowly, his eyes searching her face. I don't know, Emma. I really don't. This has been a strange night for me too. Seeing you like this, it's like I'm realizing just how much I don't know about you. There was a brief silence between them, the weight of the evening hanging in the air like a thick fog. Emma could feel the pull between them, the sense that something was shifting, something important and irreversible. The role she had played in his life had always been clear, defined. But now, she wasn't just the woman who answered his phone calls. She was someone who could reshape her future, and Ethan wasn't sure where that left him. Maybe we both need some time to figure this out, Emma said, her voice gentle but firm. I don't know what happens next, but I do know that this night changed me. And maybe it changed you too. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to deny that she was right. Everything had changed tonight. And he didn't know if he was ready to face the consequences of that change. With a final, lingering look, Emma opened the door and stepped inside, leaving Ethan standing on the threshold of something neither of them could fully understand. The night was over, but the questions it had raised were just beginning. And as Ethan walked away, his thoughts were consumed by the realization that any of the days that followed the gala felt like a blur to Emma. The excitement and admiration she had experienced on that night faded into a quiet, almost surreal silence. Each time she walked into the office, it felt like she was slipping back into her old, familiar role, her desk, the phone calls, the mundane tasks she had so often completed on autopilot. But nothing felt the same anymore. Every conversation she had with her colleagues felt shallow, almost irrelevant in comparison to the world she had briefly inhabited. The office buzzed around her as usual, but Emma's mind was elsewhere, replaying the night over and over again. It wasn't just the attention that had changed her. It was the conversations, the ideas, the realization that she had something to offer that went beyond organizing schedules and answering emails. She had ideas, real, valuable ones, and people had listened. Richard Gaines had promised a meeting, and she wasn't sure whether to treat it as a fleeting moment or an opportunity that could completely alter the course of her life. Emma had never considered herself someone who could be a player in the world of high finance, business, or power. She had always kept her distance from such aspirations, preferring the steady, predictable nature of her office work. But now, it seemed like the doors to a whole new world had been cracked open, and she was unsure whether she was ready to step through them. For the first time in years, Emma was questioning everything. Her life, her choices, the direction she had been following, all of it felt uncertain. She spent long hours at night thinking about the conversations at the gala, wondering if she could ever find her place in that world. Could she really work alongside people like Richard, people who had the power to change industries with a few well-placed words? Could she, someone who had spent most of her life unnoticed, really hold her own in that kind of arena? The thought terrified her, and yet, a part of her was drawn to it. The world she had seen at the gala had shown her a side of life that was dynamic, exciting, and full of possibility. It wasn't the sterile, routine life she had grown used to in the office. But at the same time, Emma was reluctant to let go of the stability she had always known. Her job, her role, while not glamorous, had always been her anchor. It wasn't a career she had dreamed about, but it had provided her with a sense of safety. The idea of stepping into something unknown felt like leaping into a void. Then, there was Ethan. She hadn't heard from him much since the gala. He had sent her a brief message a few days later, congratulating her again for her success, but there had been no follow-up conversation. Emma understood that he had his own life, his own priorities, but she couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them. The dynamic had changed, subtly, but irreversibly. He had seen her in a different light now, and she wasn't sure where that left them. Ethan had always been supportive, even kind, but now, she felt the distance between them growing, as if he was seeing her through a new, uncertain lens. She had gone from being his quiet receptionist to someone who was walking a path that might lead her far away from him. She hadn't intended for any of this to happen, and yet it was impossible to deny the pull of the possibilities now before her. One afternoon, just over a week after the gala, Emma received a call that would force her to confront all the uncertainty she had been avoiding. It was from Richard Gaines' office. Her heart raced as she answered, the familiar office noise around her fading into the background. "Ms. Harrison, this is Rachel from Richard Gaines' office. We'd like to confirm your meeting with Mr. Gaines for tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. at his downtown office. Does that work for you?" Emma's throat went dry as she processed the words. A meeting. A real meeting with Richard Gaines. The opportunity she had been unsure whether to accept was now right in front of her, and there was no turning back. She quickly agreed, her voice betraying a mix of excitement and anxiety. After hanging up, she sat back in her chair, her mind whirling. This was it, the moment that would change everything. But how was she supposed to prepare for something like this? She had no idea what was expected of her, and yet, there was a sense of inevitability in the air. She was going to have to make a decision. The hours leading up to the meeting felt like a whirlwind. Emma couldn't concentrate on anything. She went over her thoughts, her ideas, trying to organize them into something coherent. She couldn't just walk in there and wing it, could she? No, she needed to be prepared. But how could she possibly be prepared for something so unknown? The more she thought about it, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She decided to dress more formally than she normally would for the meeting. After all, this was Richard Gaines, one of the most powerful figures in the business world. She wore a tailored blazer, black pants, and heels, simple, but professional. As she checked herself in the mirror, she felt a knot in her stomach. Was she making a mistake? Was she even ready for this? The questions kept swirling, but there was no turning back now. When she arrived at the building where Richard's office was located, the sheer size of the building was enough to make her heart race. The lobby was sleek and modern, with high ceilings and polished marble floors. She was immediately greeted by a receptionist who directed her to the elevator, which took her up to the top floor. As the elevator ascended, Emma's palms began to sweat. She had never been in a setting like this before. Everything about the building screamed wealth and power. She had always been someone who stayed in the background, keeping to the margins. But now, she was about to enter the heart of this world. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped into a vast, open space. Richard's office was even grander than she had imagined, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, sleek leather chairs, and polished wood accents. Richard himself was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned as he heard her approach, and his face broke into a welcoming smile. He was exactly how she had imagined, polished, confident, and every bit the businessman that rumors had made him out to be. "Emma, welcome. It's great to see you again," he said, offering his hand. His handshake was firm, but his smile was warm. "Thank you for having me," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the nerves that threatened to overwhelm her. "I wasn't sure if this was real or if I had just imagined it after all the excitement of the gala." Richard laughed, a deep, reassuring sound. "Trust me, Emma, I don't make offers like this lightly. When I say you impressed me, I mean it. I'm very interested in what you have to offer." The words sent a shiver of both excitement and terror through Emma. She had been trying to prepare herself for this meeting, but hearing Richard's words made everything real. She was no longer just Emma, the receptionist. She was someone who had the potential to be part of something much bigger. But was she ready? Was she ready to step into this world, to abandon the life she had known for so long? Richard motioned for her to sit, and as they discussed the possibilities of future collaborations, Emma's mind raced. She spoke about the ideas she had developed from her observations in the office, how she had seen gaps in the market that no one else had noticed. The more she spoke, the more she realized how natural it felt to talk about these things, how fluid the conversation came to her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just an observer of the business world, she was part of it. As the meeting came to an end, Richard stood up and extended his hand once again. "I think we could do something great together, Emma. I'll have my team reach out to you with next steps. I'd like to bring you into some of our projects and see how we can build something that benefits both of us." Emma shook his hand, a mixture of disbelief and excitement flooding her chest. As she left his office, the world felt different. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no going back now. The question wasn't whether she was ready for this, it was whether she was willing to embrace it. The door to a new life had opened, and Emma had to decide if she would walk through it. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind for Emma. She had hardly any time to adjust to the life-altering opportunity that had presented itself. After her meeting with Richard Gaines, the gravity of the situation finally began to sink in. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was moving too quickly, that she was being pulled into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. The office, once her comfort zone, now felt more like a cage. She walked in each day with a sense of tension in her chest, the weight of the decisions ahead of her looming over her. She had been offered a chance to step into a new world, but that meant leaving behind everything she had known, everything that had given her stability. It felt like she was on the edge of a precipice, with no clear sense of what would come next. Richard's team had reached out to her, and the discussions had started moving at an unprecedented pace. What had once seemed like an impossible dream, joining the ranks of a powerful business empire, was now becoming a very real prospect. Emma had been included in meetings, given projects to work on, and her input was actively sought after. The more she became involved in these high-level discussions, the more she realized that she had been right all along. She wasn't just a receptionist, she was someone with ideas, someone who could contribute in a meaningful way. But as her confidence grew, so did the uncertainty. She wasn't sure whether she was truly ready for the responsibility, the fast-paced, high-stakes environment that came with this kind of work. The people she was now working with were seasoned professionals, experts in their fields, and there she was, just a woman who had stumbled into this world by chance. At the same time, she couldn't ignore the part of her that was exhilarated by it all. Every conversation she had in these new meetings pushed her to think in ways she hadn't before. She felt as though she were constantly on the edge of a breakthrough, her mind constantly buzzing with ideas. The pressure was immense, but the thrill of being heard, of making a real impact, was unlike anything she had ever experienced in the office. She had spent years in the background, observing, listening, learning from the sidelines. But now, she was no longer a passive participant. She was at the table, and her thoughts were being taken seriously. She had been thrust into a world of opportunity, and it was hers to claim, or to walk away from. But as quickly as her career was taking off, so too was her relationship with Ethan beginning to unravel. She hadn't heard from him much since the night of the gala. At first, she thought he might just be giving her space, but the longer the silence stretched, the more she began to wonder if things had changed between them. Ethan had always been someone she could count on, someone who had encouraged her to reach for more. But now, every time she saw him, she couldn't help but feel the distance between them. He had seen her in a new light, and she wasn't sure what that meant for their friendship, or for whatever it was they had shared before. Ethan's behavior had become more distant, even when they were in the same room. She could tell he was proud of her, but there was something else there, a certain unease, as if he didn't quite know how to interact with her anymore. Emma had tried reaching out a few times, but his responses were brief, and the warmth that had once been there seemed to have evaporated. It wasn't that he was angry, but there was a coolness to their interactions, a sense that something unspoken had changed between them. She couldn't blame him for it, though. After all, she wasn't the same person she had been before. The gala, the meetings with Richard, the attention from the business world, it had all transformed her. But she hadn't expected it to change her relationship with Ethan. She wasn't sure what had happened, but it seemed like the closer she got to this new world, the farther apart they grew. One night, about a month after her meeting with Richard, Emma was sitting in her apartment, her mind racing through the latest project she was working on when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, half expecting it to be another update from Richard's team. But it wasn't. It was a text from Ethan. "Can we talk?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him in so long, and the text felt like a sudden shock to her system. She hesitated for a moment before replying. "Of course." "When?" A few minutes later, he responded. "I'll come by." "About 9?" It had been a long time since they had talked like this, just the two of them. The anticipation of the conversation felt heavy, but at the same time, Emma couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, they could get things back to normal. She wasn't sure how, but she was willing to try. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Emma opened it, and there stood Ethan, looking as though he hadn't changed a bit. But when their eyes met, she saw something different, something guarded, something that hadn't been there before. He was wearing his usual casual clothes, but there was a tension in the way he held himself. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Can I come in?" "Of course," Emma replied, stepping aside to let him in. The moment he crossed the threshold, she could feel the distance between them, like an invisible barrier that neither of them knew how to break. They sat down on the couch, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma wasn't sure what to say. The words felt stuck in her throat, heavy with all the things that had been left unsaid. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Emma, I've been thinking a lot about you and everything that's happened," he said, his voice serious. "I'm proud of you. You've done something incredible. But I don't know where I fit into all of this anymore. It's like, you've changed, and I'm not sure if I even know who you are anymore." Emma's heart sank. His words hit her harder than she expected. She had known, deep down, that this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all feel so final. She had changed. There was no denying it. The life she had once known, the life she had shared with Ethan, was slipping away, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. "I don't know how to explain it," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want to change. I didn't want this to affect anything between us. But everything is moving so fast, and I don't know how to keep up with it all. I don't know what I'm doing." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "I know. I get it. But I don't think you see it the way I do. You're not just a receptionist anymore, Emma. You're someone who has the potential to build something incredible. I'm proud of you for taking the leap. I just don't know how I fit in now." The pain in his voice was palpable, and Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had never meant to push Ethan away, but somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged, and now it seemed like they were standing at the edge of something that neither of them knew how to cross. "I don't want to lose you," Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to balance everything. I don't know how to make it work." Ethan reached out and took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her for a moment. "Maybe we don't have to balance it. Maybe we just need to find a new way to fit together. But I can't keep pretending that everything is the same when it's not. You're changing, Emma. And maybe I need to change too." They sat there for a long time, the silence between them filled with unspoken emotions and untold truths. Emma didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she realized that it wasn't just about the choices she made for herself. It was about how those choices affected the people around her, the ones she cared about. She couldn't turn back time, but she knew she needed to figure out how to move forward without losing the people who mattered most to her. As the night wore on, Emma and Ethan talked. It wasn't easy. There were moments of silence, moments when the words didn't come. But in the end, they understood something important. Their paths had diverged, but that didn't mean they had to completely lose each other. They would have to find a new way to be in each other's lives, a way that allowed them both to grow, to change, without losing what had once brought them together. It wouldn't be easy, but they were both willing to try. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she wasn't walking it alone. And for now, that was enough. As the months passed, Emma's life continued to evolve in ways she never could have imagined. The decision she had made to step into the business world was proving to be both exhilarating and exhausting. She found herself in an unfamiliar world of meetings, strategic planning, and constant communication with high-powered individuals. The pace was relentless, and at times, it felt like she was barely keeping up. But despite the challenges, there was a part of her that couldn't deny the rush, the satisfaction of being part of something bigger, of contributing in ways she had never thought possible. At work, Emma quickly became known for her ability to connect the dots in ways that others didn't always see. Her background as a receptionist, where she had been exposed to every facet of the company, gave her a unique perspective. She could spot inefficiencies, identify gaps, and suggest improvements that others had overlooked. Richard had been right to see something in her, and the more she worked alongside him, the more she realized how much she had to offer. But with each new responsibility came a weight of expectation, and Emma found herself balancing on a fine line. She had become someone who could be relied upon, someone whose ideas were taken seriously. But the pressure to continue delivering was immense. Still, there were moments when the excitement of it all would hit her, like an electric current running through her veins. Sitting in a conference room, discussing a project that could change the trajectory of the company, she would occasionally catch herself thinking, "I'm doing this. I'm actually doing this." She had gone from answering phones and scheduling meetings to having her own ideas implemented in boardroom discussions. It was a heady feeling, and yet, there was always the nagging thought in the back of her mind, what if I'm not enough? What if I can't handle this? The nights were often the hardest. When Emma got home, she would collapse into bed, too tired to even think about the day. But sleep rarely came easily. The weight of the day would linger, the conversations, the decisions, the pressure to be perfect. She often found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the right choice. The shift in her relationship with Ethan had only added to her stress. While they had managed to find a new way of being in each other's lives, their connection had changed. The deep bond they had once shared was now tempered by the new roles they played in each other's lives. Ethan had tried to understand her transformation, but there were moments when he seemed lost in it, as if the woman he had known was slipping away from him. Emma couldn't blame him. She had changed, and with that change, their relationship had morphed into something unrecognizable. They still cared for each other, but the way they interacted had shifted in subtle ways. It was no longer the comfortable, easy friendship they had once had. It had become something more distant, and Emma didn't know how to close that gap. She knew she had to figure out how to balance her new life with the people she still cared about, but the more she immersed herself in her work, the more it felt like something was slipping through her fingers. One evening, as she was catching up on emails and preparing for the next day's meetings, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. "I think we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since they had had a real conversation about where they stood. The last time they had met, things had felt strained, as if neither of them knew how to approach the new dynamics of their relationship. Emma had been avoiding this moment, hoping that the distance would naturally resolve itself. But now, as she stared at the message, she knew it couldn't be avoided any longer. She responded, her fingers shaking slightly as she typed. "Okay. When? I'll come by in an hour." Emma set her phone down and took a deep breath. She didn't know what this conversation would bring, but she knew it was necessary. She had always believed that the key to any relationship was communication, but now she wasn't so sure. Could they really go back to the way things were? Or had the changes in her life made it impossible to ever return to the comfortable, familiar place they had once shared? An hour later, there was a knock at her door. Emma opened it, and there stood Ethan, as casual as ever, but with an intensity in his eyes that made her stomach flip. He stepped inside, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words and emotions that neither of them had been able to express. "I've been thinking about us," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter than usual, and Emma could hear the tension in it. "I know things have been different. I know you've changed, and I've been trying to figure out where I fit in all of this." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "I've been thinking the same thing," she replied. "Everything feels different now, Ethan. It's like I'm living in two worlds. The one I had before, with you and with everything I knew, and the one I'm in now, where things are moving so fast I can barely keep up. I don't know how to balance it all." Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. "I get it, Emma. I do. You've become someone incredible, someone who's going to do amazing things. But I don't want to lose you in the process. I don't want to be someone who just watches from the sidelines. I want to be part of your life, but I don't know how to fit into this new version of you." The vulnerability in his words hit Emma harder than she expected. She had known that Ethan was struggling with the changes, but hearing him voice it, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, made it all feel so real. She had never wanted to push him away. She had never wanted to let go of the person who had always been there for her, who had been her constant in a world that seemed so uncertain. But the world she was now part of was shifting, and she wasn't sure how much room there was for someone like Ethan. "I don't want to lose you either," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make everything work." Ethan took a step closer to her, his expression softening. "Maybe we don't have to make it work all at once. Maybe we just need to take it one step at a time. You've changed, Emma, but that doesn't mean I can't be part of your life. It just means that we need to find a new way to be there for each other." Emma looked up at him, her heart aching with the weight of everything that had been said. She knew he was right. They couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to find a way forward, together, but on different terms. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she realized that her journey wasn't just about her career or her newfound success. It was also about the relationships she valued and how they would evolve in the face of change. As Ethan stood there, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path ahead was unclear, and there would be challenges along the way. But she no longer felt alone in it. She had the strength to navigate the changes, and she wasn't going to let fear dictate her decisions. With Ethan by her side, she knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but she was ready to embrace it, with all the twists and turns that it would bring. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt hopeful. She had come so far, and while there was still much to figure out, she knew that she was capable of handling whatever came next.